Tonight's show is a bit different as we focus on the upcoming 2024 presidential election. Former President Donald Trump is the current frontrunner in the 2024 GOP presidential race, but there are 11 White House hopefuls who are in line for the top seat. That includes longtime conservative radio host Larry Elder. The South Central native officially entered the political arena in 2021, leading to a tight recall election with Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom. Elder has since set his sights on a bigger stage, officially announcing his presidential campaign in April.
I am running as an America First MAGA Republican. Why then, Mr. Elder, are you running since we have a frontrunner who is a America First MAGA guy? Because there are so many issues that we should be talking about that our side does not talk about very much, if at all.
Elder has a background in law and has spent the last 3 decades as an outspoken voice covering social and political issues. The man himself joins me now. Larry Elder is here to talk about his presidential campaign and to get to the core of the most pressing issues facing America, especially for our show, Black America. Larry, welcome to the Griot.
Mark, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
For our viewers who might be new to your campaign, give us some insight into your background, your upbringing.
Well, as you pointed out in your opening, I'm from South Central Los Angeles. My father never knew his biological father. My last name, Elder's name, was some dude who was in his life the longest. He was an alcoholic who physically beat his mom, and my dad tried to intervene. He would beat my father. My father's mother was illiterate, irresponsible, had a series of boyfriends that she lived off of. So my dad comes home at the age of 13, Mark. Elder was long, and he started quarreling with his mom's then boyfriend. The mother sides with the boyfriend and throws my father out of the house, never to return. You're talking about a 13-year-old black boy, Athens, Georgia, at the beginning of Jim Crow South. My dad literally picked up trash in order to survive. He joined the Marines, served during World War II. He was one of the first black Marines. They were called the Montford Point Marines. He gets out of the Marines. He was in charge of cooking for the colored soldiers. Goes to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he married my mom to get him a job as a cook. And he's told by restaurant after restaurant after restaurant, we don't hire. Goes to an unemployment office. The lady said, you went to the wrong door. My dad says, what door should I go through? She had to go to the door called colored only. My dad goes out to that door, goes through that door to the very same lady who sent him out. Came home to my mom and said, this is BS. I'm going to LA where I was before the war. My dad was a Pullman porter before the war and traveled all around the country and came to this place called California. And he thought it was more liberal. It was sunny. People seemed to be more friendly. So my dad told my mom he's coming back to LA to get him a job as a cook. Comes out here, told the same thing, although they don't use the word, they just tell him he doesn't have any references. So my dad goes to an unemployment office, this time just one door, takes the first thing he could get. My dad worked 2 full-time jobs, Mark, as a janitor cleaning toilets. Cooked for a family on the weekend to make additional money because he wanted my mom to be a stay-at-home mom for my brothers and me. And then went to night school to get his GED. After getting his GED, went to night school to learn how to operate a small restaurant. At the age of 7, my dad starts a small restaurant near downtown LA, runs that until his mid-80s. By the time my dad retires, he owns that property next door, plus a little home that's still in our family, shabby for an 8th grade dropout. So that's my dad. He was my role model. He and I became very good friends when I was 25 years old, after not really speaking to him for a long time because I thought he was too harsh. I thought he punished us too often. I just didn't understand him. We had an 8-hour conversation at the end of which my dad was bigger and bigger and Larry was smaller and smaller, and he and I became the best of friends. So then I went on to college, New England, law school in the Midwest, worked for a big law firm in Cleveland, and then went into television and radio not quite 40 years ago, and I've been doing that ever since. And I've taken a time out twice from my column and my TV and radio career to run for governor in 2021, as you pointed out, and then to run for president right now.
So this is an interesting background, right? You come from a long tradition of working poor, and working class black folk. You're in California, which is I'll say, at least in the last 20, 30 years, a blue state, a decidedly blue state. How did you become a conservative?
It was my dad. My mom was a lifelong Democrat. My dad, a lifelong Republican. And like most boys, you pretty much side with your mother when you're little. When I got older and older, my dad began to make more and more sense. My dad said this about Democrats. Democrats want to give you something for nothing. When you try and get something for nothing, you almost always end up getting nothing for something. It used to drive my mother nuts. But the more I watched life, I studied economics, and other topics, the more I realized my dad was right. So I was never really conservative. My first registration was Democrat, and then I registered as an independent. And then I registered as Republican when I thought about running for Senate about 15, 20 years ago. And I've been registered as Republican ever since then. But I've always thought of myself as more of a non, even when I was in middle school, high school, when kids will often talk about racism and being held back, I always felt that the biggest obstacle was your own attitude, your own unwillingness to realize your own God-given potential. My mother and my father always told my mothers and me, nobody can make you feel inferior without your permission. When I was a little kid, I sat down with my mom, went over an illustrated book of the presidents from Eisenhower, the current president at that point, to George Washington. When we finished it, Mark, my mom closed the book. She looked and said, Larry, someday, if you want it bad enough, you can be in this book. Now, Mark, I was never interested in elective office. I never in a million years thought I'd run for anything. I did run for the class president. Before you asked, yes, I won that race. Fast forward, I ran for governor, shocking myself. And then I ran for president, but I never in a million years thought I would do this. My point, though, is I always believed that if I wanted that as my goal, it could be achieved. I always thought somebody like Barack Obama could, in fact, be elected to this country. And as you know, he was, of course, in 2008.
The idea that you could be president, that anybody could be president, is part of the kind of American dream. It's part of the American ideal. But then there's nuts and bolts day-to-day politics. You ran in a recall election. You had the opportunity to beat Gavin Newsom. It was not a particularly close race at the end, but I mean, you certainly were in the mix. When you run for president, though, right now, is this a political statement? Is this one of those, I don't want to call it a vanity run, but a principled run to advance an agenda? Or do you believe that you, at the end of 2024, could be the president-elect of the United States?
Well, if I didn't think there was a chance I could become president, I wouldn't be doing this. I gave up my column, my radio show, my TV show to do all of this. And I'm not flush. I'm not like Trump or like Vivek. It's costing me a lot of money to do this. But I'm also realistic. I know that Donald Trump was and remains a front runner. And I thought at the very least, if I'm not successful, I will put forward some of the issues I think our party does not talk enough about, if at all. Notably, the epidemic of fatherlessness, a need for an amendment to the Constitution to fix spending to a certain percentage of the GDP. Otherwise, government gets bigger and bigger, whether Ronald Reagan is in office or Bill Clinton is in office. A stronger case for the need for schools K through 12, where, for example, just to pick one city, Baltimore, there are 13 public high schools in Baltimore, Mark, all located in the inner city, where 0% of the kids can do math at grade level. And I think that our side needs to refute more strongly the narrative that Democrats keep pushing and pushing, that America remains systemically racist. It's not only not true, it's getting people killed. It's called the Ferguson effect or the George Floyd effect. And that's a phenomenon of cops pulling back all over America in city after city after city. So in the last few years, thousands of people who are dead, most of them black and brown people living in the inner city, who otherwise would be alive if the police were doing their normal proactive policing, which they're not doing for fear of being accused of being systemically racist. If I can get our side to start talking about these issues, and I can tell I'm already getting them to do so, I will feel I've given back to my party, and more importantly, Mark, I will feel like my country, and that's why I'm doing this.
Fair enough. We're on the other side of the break. We're going to talk a lot about the specifics of your platform, the specifics of your agenda. But I wanted to give you, a little bit of space to just say who you are. I know sometimes you come on these platforms and they can be combative. You don't get a chance to talk. You don't get a chance to be heard. And to me, that's not what this is about. You and I have debated many times over the years, and that's cool. But today I'm here to interview you and to learn about your platform, who you are, and why you're running for president. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break. Everybody stay with us, because after the break, we're going to talk about not just the election, but we're going to talk about Larry Elder's complaint against the Republican National Convention, as well as his chances of taking on Donald Trump. Welcome back to the Griot. If you're just tuning in, we switched things up tonight. We're spending the entire hour with Republican presidential candidate Larry Elder. Larry, I want to pick up where we left off. There are a lot of people running for office. You rightly pointed out that Donald Trump is the front runner. You wouldn't run if you didn't think there was some distinction between you and Trump. What makes you different? What makes you a better candidate for president than Donald Trump?
I don't think I'm running against Donald Trump. I'm running against the Biden-Harris administration. I'm running against open borders. I'm running against their war on oil and gas. I'm running against inflation. I'm running against the way Biden Afghanistan that I think informed Vladimir Putin. I think we wouldn't be having the conversation about what's going on in Israel had Biden not done that. So I'm running because I have my own agenda, my own ideas, and I don't feel that I'm running against anybody other than Biden Harris. I said the same thing, by the way, when I ran for governor here in California. I did not say a single negative thing about any of the Republican candidates that are on the replacement side, including the guy that ran against Gavin Newsom the first time, a former U.S. House member, a current U.S. House member, the two-term mayor of San Diego. They said things about me because I was the front runner far and away, but I never said anything at all about any of them because I said, you're not the target. The target is Gavin Newsom. Let's talk about why people leave in California for the first time. Let's talk about why the average price of a home in California is 175% above average because of the marriage between the Democrats and the environmentalists who don't want any new construction. Let's talk about the fact that our schools are near the bottom of all 50 states. Let's talk about the crime going on. Let's talk about the way Gavin Newsom shut down the state in a more severe way than did any of the other 49 states, to the point where kids lost 2 years of learning, and about a third of all small restaurants here in California are now gone forever, most of them owned by mom and pop black and brown owners. Let's talk about that. That's how I feel about this race as well. I've not said a single negative thing about Trump, about DeSantis, about Vivek, about any of these guys, because any of us would be better than what we got right now.
So that's fair, and I would argue that if you're in a tight primary race, though, at some point you're going to have to convince voters why they should choose you over a governor of Florida, over a former governor of South Carolina, why you are better than the choice of than choosing someone who was the governor of New Jersey, just as three examples. But we can get there, right? The thing is, what you're saying right now is very different than what I'm seeing on that stage. I'm watching them go at each other. I'm watching them duke it out. I'm watching them throw each other under the bus. It's quite fascinating to watch. And the thing I kept saying to myself is, why is Larry Elder not there? You have campaign donations. You have polling numbers. You should be in the mix. I mean, there's the people there who are big time, long-term political, standard bearers. There's some folk who are new to the game. It would seem to me that you'd fit right in, at least on that stage. Why not?
I got shafted by the RNC. I got 3.5 million votes for governor of California, more than almost all those people standing up there on that stage. I got shafted. I was required to get 40,000 individual donors. Check. I was required to submit 3 polls where Larry Elder was at 1% or higher. Check, check, check. I get a phone call after the deadline by Ronna McDaniel, the chairwoman of the GOP, and David Bossie, the debate czar, and they can't use one of the 3 polls I submitted. Which one? The Rasmussen poll. Why? Well, it's affiliated with Trump, and the rules stipulate that any poll affiliated with any candidate cannot be used by any other candidate. After that, Rasmussen goes to Twitter, and they put out a statement. They say, we're not affiliated with Trump. There's no reason why Larry Elder cannot use it. Then we submitted a 4th poll where I was at 1%, and Ronna McDaniel said you submitted it too late, which is true, because I didn't realize I needed to submit another poll. A and B, that poll had finished its polling before the deadline. So as far as I was concerned, Mark, there was sufficient wiggle room that they could have put me up there. And I told them my lawyer is the former chair of the Federal Elections Commission. He was appointed by Ronald Reagan. And he argues that by failing to use the same debate criteria for Larry Elder, what the RNC did essentially was to give an in-kind contribution to the 8 people who made that first debate stage, and based on the value of the time that they would have to pay for if they were having to pay for that time, the FEC could levy a fine of up to $100 million to the RNC. So I gave them until 2 o'clock on the day of the debate to change their mind. They didn't, so I filed a complaint with the FEC. The problem, of course, is that that complaint will take years to sort out. In the meantime, I had to get 3% to make the next poll from 1%. How do you make 3% when you're not there in Milwaukee to do your thing, talk about your background and fatherlessness and the need for amendment to the Constitution? The other
let me ask you a question about that. I'm only interrupting you in the interest of time because you're going somewhere really interesting to me. You say you got the shaft. Why? Is it racial? Is it political? Is it gendered? Is it because you're from California? Are you a Lakers fan? I mean, what is it that makes them say we don't want him on that stage?
I think 2 reasons. The first is I think they wanted fewer people on the stage because they think it's cumbersome in 2016 to have 17 people. That's the first thing. The second thing, Mark, is I think Larry Elder gives them heartburn. For example, I talk about things in a much more aggressive way than the average Republican does, and they can make them feel uncomfortable, particularly on issues of race. For example, Joe Biden recently gave a commencement speech at Howard University, a historically black college, where he said the #1 threat to the homeland was white supremacy, police. The Anti-Defamation League keeps track of how many people are killed every year by extremists. And last year, there were 25 of the over 20,000 homicide victims in America. It is nonsense. If you want to play that game, most murders are same-race murders. Most white people who are murdered by other whites. Most black people who are murdered by other blacks. However, every year, Mark, there are around 750 interracial black, white, or white-black homicides. 500 white people are killed by blacks, even though blacks are just 13% of the population. 250 black by whites, even though whites are 60% of the population. Now, Donald Trump went to some conservative university, gave a commencement speech, and said the number one threat to the homeland was black supremacy. You and I would properly denounce him as a race-hustling demagogue. But Biden says it, there isn't a problem. And if you want to look at non-violent crime, non-homicide violent crime between blacks and whites, roughly every year, there are roughly 600,000. By non-violent, I'm talking about, by non-homicide, I'm talking about attempted murder, rape, assault with a weapon, 600,000 such instances every year between blacks and whites. 85 to 90% of the time, it is a black perp, white victim, only 10 to 15% the other way around. But if any politician, Republican, were to say the number one threat to the homeland is black supremacy, that politician should be properly denounced as a race hustling, trying to divide the country down racial lines. But Biden says it, and we don't say a word. Shortly after the Howard speech, a racist white man in Jacksonville murdered 3 black people and admitted he did it because they were black. 2 months, and Biden put out a statement and said, complicit in that kind of hatred, silence in that kind of hatred makes you complicit. About 2 months earlier, Mark, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, black guy gets a gun, walks up to a white guy, shoots him in the back of the head, kills him, doesn't know him, goes to another part to see another white guy, walks up to him in the back of the head, shoots him and kills him, and admits he did it because they're white. Biden said absolutely nothing because it does not advance his agenda. Now, I talked about this. I railed against the RNC for not pointing this out, and they didn't do it. I also think that I make them feel uncomfortable. Our side always talks about how fiscally responsible we are, and compared to the Democrats, we are. But that's a low bar. In order to really reduce spending, we need to dramatically reduce the size of government. The only way to do that, because if you run promising you to reform entitlement programs, you're going to lose elections. The only way to do that is with an amendment to the Constitution that sets spending to a certain percentage of the GDP. That's what we ought to be arguing for, and we're not doing it. So I think I make them feel uncomfortable on a number of grounds and on a number of issues. That's why I think they were that unhappy to see Larry Elder off that debate stage.
Well, we're going to put. I'm going to press you a little bit on some of those issues. We're going to have a comeback. We're going to take a short break. I'm going to ask you some lighter questions. And on the other side of that break, I'm going to press you on these questions, including black-on-black violence. Because the murder rate of black-on-blacks is tough. I remember for years I'd murder you on CNN in our debates, and the community was outraged by it. Anyway, we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the Griot. We are spending the hour talking politics with 2024 Republican presidential candidate Larry Elder. But we want to pause for a little game that we like to play on the show. It's called This or That. Now, Larry, you're a media guy. I know you know timing well, so I'm going to push you to be really fast on this because I only have 60 seconds. You just got to pick one. We can discuss at the end if there's time. Here we go. James Brown or Elvis?
Elvis.
Pumpkin pie or sweet potato pie?
Sweet potato.
Good Times or Three's Company?
Good Times.
Beyonce or Taylor Swift?
I'm not a fan of either one of them, really. Beyonce, if I had to do a push, yes.
Now, that is the political answer right there. You did the right thing. If you were to have denounced Taylor Swift and or Beyonce on this, you might as well just pack it up, go back to your radio show and your column, because that would have been the end of your entire campaign right there. I got to ask you real fast, why Elvis?
I just saw the movie called Priscilla last night. I went to a private screening. My brother, older brother Kurt, my late older brother Kurt, was a huge Elvis fan. Dragged me to all the Elvis movies, including the bad ones, and most of them were bad. I just thought he had a certain kind of vibe, and just loved the way he looked, the way he sang, his swagger, his charisma. He just dripped with charisma.
Okay, dripped with charisma. All right. We're out of time for this. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back, everybody. We're going to talk single-parent households, diversity in schools, maternal health care. We're going to talk major issues in the black community with our presidential candidate Larry Elder. Stay here. Thanks for staying with us tonight on The Griot. I am your host, Marc Lamont Hill. We've been spending the hour with conservative radio talk show host turned Republican presidential candidate Larry Elder.
1965, 25% of black kids entered the world without a father in the home married to the mother. Now it's 70%. 1965, 8% of white kids do. Now it is 25%, up threefold. If you look at the trend line on how much money we spent on so-called welfare programs and poverty, the lines parallel between those of the proliferation of kids being raised without a father and the amount of money that we spent. I believe there's a connection. So if you're asking me, do I believe that there is an economic incentive for the part of women to marry the government? Yes, I do.
Larry, you've been talking about single parenthood. You've been talking about fatherhood. You've been talking about a range of issues here. There are many of us, myself included, it's no surprise to you, who would say, look, responsible fatherhood is an important thing, but we can't disconnect responsible parenthood or fatherhood in particular from systemic issues, and that we shouldn't have to choose. You know, I agree with you that fatherlessness, irresponsible parenting is a bad thing. You should help your kids with their homework. You should go to school. You should make sure your kids are on a moral pathway. All that stuff we probably agree on 100%. But I'm also watching jobs get outsourced. I'm watching people with drug addiction in the 80s and 90s get prison time when other people who had the same addictions get a slap on the wrist, depending on what kind of drug it was. I'm not saying that anybody should use drugs. But what I am saying is there are ways that systemic issues made it harder to be responsible and gave a greater penalty for people who were irresponsible. To what extent do you factor in systemic issues, even if we concede that there's a lot of irresponsibility out there that needs to be addressed?
Well, I think that the epidemic of fatherlessness is far and away a much bigger problem than any of the things that you just now mentioned. For example, in 1940, 87% of blacks lived below the poverty level. So a lot of people think that the problems that are going on in the black community have to do with poverty. Poverty, as I said, 87% of blacks, 1940, lived below the poverty level. And of course, 1940, racism, Jim Crow, KKK, this is before the Brown versus Board of Education, before the Civil Rights Act, before any of that stuff. Yet it was very, very unusual for a black kid to be born without a father in the home married to the mother. Fast forward 20 years later, that number has fallen to 47%, the greatest 20-year period of economic growth in the history of black America. Why? Because it was rare for a kid, as I mentioned, to be brought into the world without a father in the home, a strong belief in entrepreneurship, a strong belief in patriotism, even as America was not applying these values properly to black people, and a strong belief in Judeo-Christian values. Fast forward, Black Lives Matter is an organization that 81% of blacks support. But every single thing that allowed black people to continue to march forward in the face of horrific racism is now under assault by Black Lives Matter. On their website, they attack the nuclear family. The founders are self-described trained Marxists. Marx, of course, did not believe in capitalism, did not believe in private property, and Marx was an atheist who wanted to dethrone God. So I would argue that the very things that allow black people to keep going forward in the face of obstacles far more severe than today are now under attack by many people on the left.
Let's say I were to agree with you. And again, I already know you and I are going to agree with you. And again, we can debate another time. But let's say, and I'm asking this for my audience's benefit, because I think most black folk, if my mom were watching you right now, and she might, because she probably likes you more than me, you know, she would say, yeah, Mr. Elder is correct. You know, black people need to be better parents. They need to be more responsible. Poverty is not an excuse. Work harder, do better. Again, we got that. But part of, I think, why black audiences and why black voters don't vote Republican are two things. One, they do see structural issues. They do see systemic racism. And they see very real barriers that don't contradict what you just said, but also complement them. And the second thing is they don't have a good faith belief that Republicans have their best interest at heart. You may be a colorblind, race-neutral Republican who believes that everybody should pull themselves up and do better, but there's a lot of anti-black rhetoric out there. There's a lot of people who talk about the black community as pathological within the Republican Party. So how do we address those two pieces? One, the real structural stuff that people see, and two, the feeling that the Republicans don't have the best interest of black people at heart?
A couple things, and I hope you give me time to explain this. When I go on shows like Charlemagne the God and I make the same argument, he pushed back. And I said, look, the number one cause of preventable death for a young white man, 19 years and under, is accidents, like car accidents or drownings or drug abuse, drug overdoses. The number one cause of preventable death for a 19-year-old black youth and under is homicide, almost always at the hands of another young black youth. A young black man, according to the Centers for Disease Control, age 13 to 43, is 13 times, age 10 to 43 is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a white man, same demo. Blacks account for 60% of the homicides, 60% of the shootings, and 60% of the robberies in America. If it isn't the epidemic of fatherlessness, the lack of a father in the home married to the mother, unless you're prepared to say black people are just genetically inclined to commit more crime, please tell me what it is. And he had nothing. The other thing is this, Mark, in 19...
But what about jobs, Larry? I mean, again, like... Oh, go ahead. Finish your point. I'm sorry. I realize now that was a rhetorical question.
1997, CNN and Time hooked up to do this massive survey, black teens and white teens, about racism. And they asked both of them whether racism was a major problem in America. And not too surprisingly, both black teens and white teens said yes. But then they asked black teens the following questions. Is racism a big problem, a minor problem, or no problem in your own daily life? 89% of black teens call racism a minor problem or small problem in my own daily life. In fact, twice as many black teens compared to white teens said, and this is verbatim quote, failure to take advantage of available opportunities is a bigger problem than racism, end of quote. Twice as many black teens said yes to that proposition than white teens. So what these kids are telling you, it's about work ethic, investing in yourself, getting an education, and taking advantage of the opportunities that all of us have because we were blessed to have been born on American soil.
You know, again, I think the data would push back against you. Again, your point that homicide rates are high, I don't disagree with. You know, I live in Philadelphia, man, and the older I get, as I watch my city get overtaken by gun violence, the more frustrated I get. The more I feel like I need to do more on the ground to mentor young men, to be a father figure, to try to physically get guns off of the street and illegal guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. And no one should have illegal weapons, to be clear. Again, we probably don't disagree that much on that piece of it. But I also know that when I look at, even just locally at the data, not anecdotally, but data-wise, you know, when people have jobs, they're more likely to not be involved in gangs. When people have mentoring and after-school programs and arts programs, when people have access to quality education, when people have access to church programs, to your religious piece, all of those things mitigate against violence. And at the very same time that we're seeing a rise in violence, we've also seen all those programs shrink. We've seen all those opportunities go away. And we've been seeing the state get smaller and smaller and smaller since the 80s on those issues, at the same time that it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger around policing, around military, around things that don't help us be better community members, better citizens. A lot of this stuff is mental health. We're getting rid of mental health resources. So again, I think the pushback people got, even from the Breakfast Club interview, which I watched every minute of, by the way, is not that you're wrong on critiquing some of the internal stuff, but it's like, because you think that's the biggest issue, you're not even willing to acknowledge that these systemic or structural environmental issues exist.
I disagree with virtually everything you said. For example,
Larry, you know what? Hold on one second, Larry. They're giving me the break sign, and I don't want to interrupt you in the middle of a really good point that I'm going to disagree with. Okay. So why don't we do this? Let's take the break. We'll come right back, and then I'll let you make your full argument, and then I'll disagree with it again. Everybody, I'm here with Larry Elder. He's a Republican presidential candidate. We've been talking for the entire hour about major issues impacting the black community. Stay right here. We'll have him right on the other side. We're spending the hour with Republican candidate Larry Elder. He's back with us to talk about his messaging to black voters. Larry, you were saying that you disagree with me on a variety of structural systemic issues that I pointed out that at least I believe merit acknowledgement at the same time that we talk about the family stuff. I'm going to give you one concrete issue, and I'd like you to respond to that. That way we won't be all over the place. Black women die more at childbirth than any other issue, than any other racial group. Black babies don't live. They're more likely to die at birth, and black children don't live as long. Those are environmental factors. To your point, these aren't biological. Black people aren't naturally predetermined or cosmically predestined to die, younger, and black mothers aren't predetermined to die at birth more. And the studies seem to speak to racialized treatment in the hospital. It seems to speak to people not responding to their needs and other environmental factors that undermine black health. That's an example where, like, we can't just look to responsibility, right? Can't we look at some systemic structural issues?
What you speak about is more linked to class and to income level than to race. I don't agree with the studies that show that black women are being treated differently than white women. I know it was mentioned in a recent Supreme Court case, and that study was trashed widely after it came out. But I think it's more of a class issue than a race issue. But I want to talk more about the unemployment, because jobs, of course, are vital. It is true that the unemployment rate is twice that of whites. Is that structural? Well, before the minimum wage, a black teenager was more likely to be employed than a white teenager. Why? Because a black teenager was able to offer his skills at lower levels than a white kid. Then along comes the minimum wage, and it was increased to the point where it was going higher than inflation, and then all of a sudden a black teen was more likely to be unemployed than a white teen for the first time in American history. Black married men have the same employment rate as white people. Once you get married, you have certain kind of responsibilities, and of course to be breadwinners. And it turns out that black married men have the same rate as do whites. Another fact that I think is hurting black people. Let me just one more thing. Is illegal immigration. There was a study done by the Civil Rights Commission, and the Civil Rights Commission consists of liberals, of centrists, and of conservatives. They all agreed that the group that's most hurt by illegal immigration are black and brown people living in the inner city with high school or less. The study concluded that about 1 million fewer black people are working because of the presence of illegal alien labor, and illegal alien labor puts downward pressure to the tune of around $2,000 per year on black people. So securing the borders would go a long way towards making sure that black people have economic opportunities. But I do not agree that systemic racism is what's causing black people to be less employed. Turns out that we drop out of high school at a much higher rate. If you look at bar graphs of how much homework a high school student who's black does versus a white student versus an Asian student, it's night and day. The Asians are studying much harder than white people are, which is why they do so well on standardized tests. You have to value education, which black people, unfortunately, are not valuing to the same degree as whites and Asians are. That's the problem.
So there's lots of stuff that I don't believe there's any data to substantiate the latter point you made about black people not valuing education. When you look at the educational aspirational data from, I think, kindergarten through 9th grade, it's quite clear that black kids want to be doctors and lawyers and want to aspire to do great things. Just as much as other racial groups, but let me just go down the list of things you just said, because you said a lot of important things, and I don't want to forget them because I'm getting older and I forget things. You said black people, black students drop out more. You say black students drop out more. That is true. But when you look at the educational data, it talks about not just dropouts, but push-outs, right? And people don't drop out of school because they don't study enough. When you look at the reasons that are given to people, that students give for why they left school, when you look at the data that teachers and administrators give for why students are leaving school, it's how they're treated. It's school discipline, which you're right about. Black kids get suspended more than white kids, but they also get suspended more than their white counterparts for the exact same offenses. And there are scholars like Russell Skiba who would point to the fact that teachers at that moment are making objective interpretations, subjective interpretations of student behavior. So they have to decide whether or not a student is being aggressive or violent or disengaged. When you look at the objective measures of suspendable offenses, like bringing a knife or punching a teacher in the face or smoking crack in the lunchroom, black and white kids get suspended at the same rate. But the difference is when you have to make interpretations of black behavior, the same way police officers have to, and other people have to interpret people who've always been interpreted as violent and pathological and immoral, etc., things turn out differently. You say class can explain a lot of this stuff, but even in the case of black women dying, I mean, you have the Serena Williamses and the Beyoncés of the world who encounter the same thing. And I know, lastly, and I'll give you a chance to get the final word on this, even when you look at the hospital stuff, I mean, black women's pain scores have to be higher than white women's to get the same amount of drugs or medicine in a hospital. There are different answers. And in Diva Pager's study, to give you one more, shows that white men with a felony are more likely to get a job call back than black men without a felony conviction. This is before they even meet the guy. And they've done several studies on names on a CV or a resume where they take Larry Elder, who's black, and they read his resume. Or that's a bad example, but let's say your name were Jamal Jenkins, right? They take Jamal Jenkins' resume, and then they take Michael Smith's resume, and they got the same stuff on it. Jamal Jenkins is less likely to get a callback. It's just a piece of paper. He didn't get a chance to be black yet in person, you know? So how do you, I don't get how you don't see any systemic issues. You got the final platform.
You said a lot of things. Let me just address the part about education. It's actively a fact that high school black kids study less than high school white kids and high school Asian American kids. If there's a relationship between how hard you work and results, that's a problem. Regarding this business about blacks being kicked out more than white kids, it is true. Eric Holder even referred to that as pernicious racism. It's also true that black kids are kicked out more often than white kids if the teacher is black or white, if the principal is black or white, if the school board is all black or all white, because black kids are disproportionately misbehaving. And if you don't kick out the black kids who are misbehaving, guess who suffers? The other black kids who are not misbehaving. So it's not true that this is happening because of racism.
Okay, we're not going to agree on that pesky racism point. Do you think that, or I got to go to break, but all I'll say is I think it's going to be an uphill battle to not even speak to those systemic issues for the purpose of at least addressing black voters for whom that is a serious concern. But I want you to hang out because I got a couple more tough questions for you, Larry Elder. Everybody stay here. I'm going to get this man to answer the toughest questions of the night right after the break. Stay here. Welcome back to the Griot. This special hour with 2024 GOP presidential candidate Larry Elder has been fun. But now we're turning the screws up. It's time to get to the end of the show and get to the issues that are really going to decide whether y'all going to vote for this man or not. All right, Larry Elder, we want to know what you do for fun. What is your favorite place, 60 seconds again, what is your favorite place to hang out?
Since you didn't work this in, my favorite thing to do for fun is to read my new book, which comes out November 7th, called As Goes California, My Mission to Rescue the Golden State and Save the Nation. Is available on Amazon.com or Barnes. What I do for fun, I go out to dinner with my girlfriend, I go to movies, and I love to travel.
Where's your best first date outing?
My best first date outing was a long time ago, and the reason I'm hesitating is because my girlfriend is sitting over here. She doesn't even know about this. I got picked up by a woman, this is years ago, who took me to a strip club. And I don't go to strip clubs, but going there with a woman and watching women stripping with another woman was an out-of-body experience. That was my most interesting date ever.
Last one, what's your biggest regret?
I should have made more interesting investments and stuck to some of the investments that I really had. I've always very interested in becoming wealthy. I promised myself I'd be a millionaire by the age of 35, and I was, but I could have been much, much further along in terms of my finances had I done this, done that, but I was lacked the courage to follow through things I should have done and knew better to do. So that's kind of what I wish I'd done. But that's a minor complaint.
That doesn't surprise me. You black people with black initiative. All right, I got to take a break. We're going to come back, and I want to give you the opportunity to make your final case to the American people. Stay right here. We have reached the end of the show, but before I let you go, it is customary on the show for me to give the final word. But today, it's rare, that we have a presidential candidate on the show. I'm going to let him have the last word. Larry Elder, you have 60 seconds to give your message to black America. Now remember, you're going to say something to them that's going to make them want to vote for you. Go.
Go to LarryElder.com, throw something in the tip jar, make sure that I remain in this race. I'm asking you to vote for me because I am standing up for you. I'm standing up for school choice. I recognize we're getting a substandard education K through 12. I'm standing up for secure borders. I recognize that illegal aliens pose a bigger threat to blacks in the inner city than anybody else. I'm standing up for you because inflation is hurting people at the bottom more than anybody else. I'm standing up for you because the war on oil and gas are hurting people that are on fixed incomes and low income people more than anybody else. I'm standing up for you because As far as I'm concerned, the biggest problem in Black America is the epidemic of fatherlessness, and nobody's talking about that other than Larry Elder. That's why you ought to vote for Larry Elder for president. And go to my website, larryelder.com, and be sure and buy my book that Mark won't promote called As Goes California, My Mission to Rescue the Golden State and Save the Nation.
That's right, everybody. Look, I own a bookstore. Buy Larry's book. Y'all know where to get it from. Larry, I want to thank you for joining me on the show. It's been a pleasure. I think this is the least we've ever fought on TV, so this is great. Everybody, make sure you check Larry's website out, do what you need to do, and make sure you get more content like this by going to thegrio.com. You can also download the free Grio app to get unlimited content that amplifies Black culture. I'll see you here tomorrow, y'all. My name is Marc Lamont Hill. But first, look at this wonderful city, the foundation of American democracy and the home of the Philadelphia baseball Phillies. It's all courtesy of Earth Cam. Good night.